Cool. So, hey, Mel, I thought it would be a pretty cool idea just to have like a questions and answers discussion around Kona and obviously your experience, and get a little bit more insight into how it went for you, and if there's anything you feel you could shed light on that might help people that want to go in future. I think it's quite like a big unknown. It's such a big stage, and yeah, a lot of guys don't know what they're getting into. They come and they do their local races, and it's very familiar, and then they go overseas and they're just like, oh yeah, what to expect. So, I think let's just start off by saying well done for your race in Kona. It was amazing just for you to actually get to the start line, I think. And yeah, it's a really incredible achievement. I think are like a role model to a lot of people, just for making it there, never mind actually competing and performing. So, but let's start at the beginning. So, did you plan on going to Kona this year? Was that the goal, or did you just enter a couple of Ironman races and just say, I'll take the slot if I get it, and then you got it, or was it a plan from the beginning to target Kona this year?
So yeah, this particular Kona was a little bit more planned. I mean, I guess planned is a bit of a broad word. It was the goal to get to Kona this year. I had missed out on Kona slots just twice before. So with my age group being quite small, there's normally only one slot available. So I'd come second and missed a slot, and that kind of triggered this feeling of actually actively pursuing a Kona slot. So that was, going into my qualifying race, that was my long-term plan. But as with any Ironman, you basically just have to race as well as you can. You don't know who else is going to show up and what's going to happen. But it was very intentional. It wasn't just a luck of the draw kind of. Also raced with enough time before Kona so that if I did qualify, we had time to prepare. And I also, in my head, had given myself time that if I didn't qualify, I had time to potentially do another Ironman closer to Kona.
Right. Yeah. And which Ironman did you qualify for Kona at?
So I qualified at Ironman Israel, which is a bit of a contentious topic currently, but yeah. So very different conditions to what we raced in Kona. It was freezing cold, 16 degrees, rained the whole day. So yeah, completely different experience. And that was last year in November, so almost a year ago that I raced there.
Cool. So you've had like almost an entire year to prepare once you had secured your slot.
Yes, yeah.
All right, and tell us a little bit about when you take your slot for an Ironman race. Talk to us a little bit about that. I know that you've got to be intentional about it up front before the race. You've got to specify whether you are going to take the slot or not. But just give us a little bit more, maybe about how to go about accepting your slot, and then once you've qualified, what actually what happens next.
Yeah, so I mean, it's basically I think races do vary a little bit on how they manage this. So with us, they did tell us post-race how many slots each age group was getting. So you kind of had an idea of whether or not you were in contention. I know not all races do that up front, but you then essentially go down to the roll down, which normally takes place with an Ironman, normally after prize giving. They do the roll down and they basically just work their way through the age groups. And it's very much on the spot. There's no time to decide or think about it or can I get back to you? They'll call up your name. You're expected to walk straight up. They give you your coin. You shake. I had Paul Kay give me my coin, shook his hand.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Then you walk over to the admin ladies, you sign a form and you pull out your credit card and you have to pay for the slot straight away.
So tell us a little bit about that. How much money do you have to have in your bank account right then and there on the spot to pay for the slot?
So I think at the time it was $1,500 that you had to pay. So it's, I mean, a lot of money, and you obviously have to be prepared for that. So yeah, they normally give you the cost prior. So if you are potentially in contention or thinking about a slot, yeah, you gotta know that money's got to be available straight away.
Right. So not only do you have to train bloody hard and make sure that you're ready for the race, be intentional about accepting it, you also have to have about 30K in the bank account just to swap. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's pretty important for people to know. Like, that's a lot of money.
It's a huge amount of money, and I mean it's just the first of many huge purchases that you will make on the process of getting to Kona. And that was also part of the reason why we did it a year out, because it gave us a year to actually pay off stuff and slowly save for things, because we knew it was going to be toll. It was going to be tricky to actually get there. So yeah, it is something you really need to consider, is how much are you able to part with, and are you actually going to be able to do it? Because it's also non-refundable. Once you've taken that slot, it's done. Like, you can't now change your mind and realize that it's going to cost you too much to go or something. I think potentially if you're injured, they might roll it over, but that's about as far as it'll go. You're never going to get that money back.
Right. So, yeah, 100% you're in it, and that's that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, yeah. I mean, it was pretty cool that you qualified almost a year before. So obviously you had plenty time now to think about the race, and to think about what the goals were. So talk to me a little bit about how you planned for those goals. Maybe if you're willing to share, like, what those goals were for you, and then yeah, just how then you trained for this event for the next sort of 10 months.
Yeah, so I mean, this was also quite a big discussion, because obviously you've just come off a massive Ironman block, and mentally I was like, sure, I don't know if I can't carry this type of form for another 10 months, which you can't realistically. And so that's where obviously having really good coaches, which I was very privileged to have you and Rich behind me for this. But yeah, the way we went about it actually was I took a bit of a break for the 3 months post Ironman, and I actually just ran, and I did a marathon, which was a really cool experience. And it was nice to just be running, because running is a lot less time, and you just can fit in a lot more. So it was like a complete mental break for me. And that took me basically until February of this year. And after that, we then went back into tri training, but I was essentially starting almost from scratch again with cycling and swimming. So yeah, I kind of built from there. And after discussions with Rich about the best way to play it, we decided on like a June-July 70.3 to try and break up the training a bit. So very intentionally tried not to focus on Kona too early, because it can become a lot, and you can get very demotivated when you're training for the same race for like 8 months. So yeah, that's how we broke it up. We focused on, I then chose to do Durban 70.3 in June, which was also a nice opportunity to come home and catch up with everyone. But it also just broke up that training block really well, because after Durban, I still had a bit of time. I think I ended up taking nearly 2 weeks off because I got sick as well. So that was good timing. And then we had about 16 weeks, I think, from then till Kona. So it was actually like a really good way of it being broken up and being able to kind of make the training blocks a little bit more digestible, rather than just this mammoth year of Kona specific training.
And do you think that racing inside that sort of 10-month block that you had, do you think maybe racing more would have been a little bit better, maybe a little bit easier for you? Do you think it might have prepared you a little bit better, or were you happy with the amount of, I mean, like you said, you ran a marathon and you crushed your PB, like 20-minute PB or something ridiculous like that on your marathon, and then you had Durban 70.3 as well. I also know that you had a couple of shorter Olympic distance triathlons and stuff like that. Would you think that you perhaps wanted to race more or a little bit less, or were you very, very happy with the amount of racing, broke it up exactly how you wanted it to?
I think ideally I would have raced a little bit more, particularly post Durban Ironman. I think if I'd had maybe one more 70.3 in that block, it would have been good. And I mean, it sounds maybe a little bit arrogant, but potentially not even tapered for it, more just as like a training race before Kona. But there's just obviously something about racing that allows you to pull more out of yourself. You're pushed to a little bit of a deeper level. And when you're doing these big Ironman blocks, it's really nice to get a little bit of that into your legs, because you tend to get a lot kind of slower and just more all about endurance. For us here in the UAE, it was just the timing of it. Our race season is winter because of the heat, so there's literally no events between May and September, which is exactly when I would have needed some races. So it was either a case of traveling overseas again to race or not racing. So that was more the deciding factor. I think if I'd been based somewhere where there was races available, I definitely would have raced a little bit more. Even just throwing in some running races, like for my long run efforts, it all just helps to have other people around, a little bit of competition, tables, kind of practice that race nutrition. So definitely would have done a few more events if I could have.
Okay, cool. So let's quickly dive into your actual time in Hawaii now. I think that's pretty much what people want to hear about the most, right? So let's talk a little bit. How many days did you get to Hawaii before you started the race?
So we got there, I think it was 10 days out. So like a week and a half pre-race. So that, the rule of thumb is that you're meant to be there a day for every hour of time difference that you're traveling through, which is significant for us. So we weren't quite able to do that, but I did want to be there quite a long time in advance just to allow my body to try and adapt. So yeah, we were there for 10 days pre-race.
And if you could have had it your way, obviously you're saying you would have liked to have been there for a little bit longer.
I think so. I think it would have been cool to have, because it took so long to come around, like my legs to come around after the travel. I think mostly just because it was so long, like our travel was 35 hours. So it took me 4 or 5 days to feel like my legs were starting to fire. And that basically took me into, I think, Monday or Tuesday of race week. So it would have been nice to kind of get through that phase a little bit earlier, so that I'd had one kind of solid weekend of training instead of those last few like key sessions feeling quite sluggish and not great. But it is just, we're not professionals. You got to kind of do what you got to do. I know a lot of people had a lot less time on the island than we did. So I think you just have to kind of roll with whatever you have.
And obviously there's a lot of factors to consider there as well, like how much time you can get off work and the actual cost of being on the island. I know that's not cheap either. So, okay, cool. And then talk to me a little bit about the time jump. Obviously, we trying to cater for, as big an audience as possible, but just in terms of South Africa, it's quite a big time jump, and it's something that you already touched on. But how did you prepare for that time jump? Did you change your sleeping patterns well in advance? Did you only try and change them when you got there? Did you try supplementation? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, South Africa and Dubai are similar. It's 14 hours Dubai and it's 12 hours from South Africa, which I think is probably one of the furthest time differences you're going to see. The more you move east, the time difference might get longer, but you're getting closer in time of day. So it's not as much of a change in your body, whereas for us, it was literally day and night. And it is a huge factor. I think personally, I didn't find the sleep as difficult. I kind of expected to really struggle to sleep or be waking up super early. That part wasn't as much of a problem. I think maybe something we overlooked was the digestive system. Your digestive system's on the same sort of body clock. So I definitely found meal timing was important. Like I had to try and once we'd landed on the island, that is, eat at kind of the appropriate meal times because I wasn't naturally hungry as I normally would because it was like the middle of the night. But we did a few things. I actually used an app called Time Shifter that was super helpful. So you input your travels and your destination and everything, and it essentially told me what to do. So from 4 days before we left, we started to try and shift our bedtime. So basically waking up quite early and then trying to go to bed a little bit earlier, which was okay. It kind of fell into our normal pattern anyway. But it also assisted with kind of when you should be taking caffeine, when you want to avoid caffeine. And that carried on through all the way through the travel. So even on the flight, it was telling us, don't take caffeine for the next 6 hours, try and stay awake for this period of the flight. And then, okay, now you need to try and sleep, which obviously is not as simple as that, but we tried to follow it as closely as possible. And I did use melatonin as well, which worked really well for me just to initiate kind of that sleep response. So taking that 30 minutes before bed. And yeah, that's essentially what we did. And I think it worked pretty well. We were exhausted when we landed, but that was also because we'd been in transit for 30 hours. And after that, we kind of flipped onto the right schedule pretty quickly. In my opinion, it was easier than I expected it to be.
Yeah, I think it's also just because you prepared quite well. I mean, a lot of guys, like, they don't try and shift their bedtimes, before they actually start to travel. They maybe try and watch too many movies on the plane, thinking that if they make themselves overly tired, then, they'll sleep well when they get there. And I think that's a big mistake. So I think doing it the right way definitely helped you in that regard. Okay, cool. Let's just do some quick fire stuff here. Getting training done while you were on the island. How easy was that? Did you have access to venues? Was it simple enough to get out on the Queen K for a bike ride? How was the run? Tell me a little bit about the time of day. Did you try and bike and run, the same kind of time that you would be biking and running on during the race, or were you trying to save energy and bike and run a little bit earlier or later, just to avoid the heat?
So training on the island's pretty straightforward. Like, obviously, the Queen K is a freeway, so that's the only kind of barrier. It's open to training all the time, but you are riding on a road with, I think, 2 or 3 lanes of freeway cars, which for me was quite a little bit intimidating initially because in Dubai we don't ever ride on the roads. We're very privileged to only ride on bike tracks, so that was a little bit daunting, but the course is open all the time, and that's for running and cycling. So I think if you just need to be smart about maybe your timing. Like, I tended to want to ride a little bit earlier just to not be in the heart of the traffic either. But I did also purposefully go out one of the days at the time that I kind of expected to start the bike, just to see what the temperature was going to be like. Also just get an idea of kind of where the sun would be. We were still at that stage debating a little bit about wearing a visor versus glasses, and these were all the kind of things we needed to decide. So yeah, I tried not to do too much in the middle of the day, but I think the nice thing is it is hot, but if you're done by like 9-10 a.m. you're okay. Like you're not in the death of it. So you did have that option to kind of test out the time of day as well.
Okay, I think that was quite important what you just said there. I think a lot of people don't go into that kind of detail. Riding at the time where you're going to ride to see whether you're going to wear, a clear visor or whether you're going to, bike with sunglasses on. That's pretty in depth. But I think this is the type of thought that needs to go into a world champs, right? You've got to be smart about it. I mean, you're looking for marginal gains, to have your best performance on the day. That was quite a cool little nugget of information. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the swimming there. I mean, I know you had a pool there. I also know that it was 25 yards, not 25 meters. Little
Yes.
bit of a difference for the guys that are used to swimming in meters. But more specifically, talk to me a little bit about swimming in the ocean. Like, are you worried about the ocean life, or is it just like so beautiful that you're not really too concerned? And it's obviously clear, right? You can see if there's something coming for you or not, right?
Yeah. Yeah, actually it was pretty cool. Like the race boys are out from like 2 weeks before the race, so you can see the whole course from ages, which is amazing. And there are so many people in the water every day, athletes and non-athletes. Like people just swim there all the time, so you can pretty much swim any time of day. And it was just open to the public. It was never closed off. And yeah, I mean, I personally wasn't too worried about the sea life. I got more excited when I saw stuff. To me, it was more distracting. Like there were so many fish. We saw turtles. So, I mean, that's pretty epic to kind of swim along on the race course with that. And we loved it. We really enjoyed like spending some time out there. And it was nice to also just be out in the open water and get an idea of the currents because of like the shape of the harbor, there definitely are some currents. So it was good to kind of feel it out and get a little bit of an idea of what was going to happen on race day, hopefully.
Yeah, that was going to be
Yeah.
my follow-up question, actually, is just, when you're watching on the live stream, it does look fairly flat. The conditions do look good to swim, but there definitely seems to be some sort of undersea current that can affect the day. Obviously, also winds can affect it as well. So was that something that you were aware of while you were swimming? And talk to me about a little bit about, maybe was it there in the first half, second half? Could you feel it the entire time? Yeah, maybe just give us a bit more information about that.
Yeah, so I think maybe because coming from South Africa, a lot of South Africans, we kind of evaluate the condition of the ocean based on how much swell there is. So there's no swell. Like you're getting into the ocean and there's not like this big break coming in or anything like that. Not where you're swimming, at least. So you don't really have to contend with that. But there's 100% currents under the water, and particularly I noticed in my practice swims coming back in was much slower than going back out. So I think we chatted a little bit about that we were expecting my second half to be slower because of the currents. This changed a little bit on race day. Like the water it wasn't super swirly or anything, but there was quite a lot of chop, and there were definitely sections of quite a lot of pulling. And I did wonder, because from where we were staying, you could see the back end of the swim course, and there's quite a big break, like a surfing break, that kind of came off the swim course. So when we looked at it, we kind of knew that section would definitely have a bit to deal with, because if there's a break just after that, then there's definitely some currents pulling. But again, it's almost like when you're riding into a headwind, you don't always notice how bad it is when you're in it. And then when you get out of it, you're suddenly like, oh, actually, I was dealing with quite a lot there. So yeah, a little bit different from maybe swimming off Durban Beach, where you're just getting hammered by these huge waves. didn't have to worry about that, but definitely choosing your lines and stuff is important. And I think Lucy mentioned it in her post-race interview that she took quite a different line to the rest of the pros, and that one of the surfers had told her that this was the better line. It had less rip or less pull. And I mean, we saw what she did on the swim course. So there definitely, there is something to that as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so we're out of the water now. We go into T1. Looks absolutely chaotic. I mean, I don't know how there was like 3,000 bicycles, in T1. Talk to me about how to find your bike. I mean, is that easy? Did you have like a land markers that you were looking for, or how does that all work?
Yeah, so it is pretty busy in there. I mean, the volunteers are amazing. Like, they're super helpful and super knowledgeable about what you need, which is also really nice. Like, a lot of you often get good intentioned volunteers, but they actually have no idea what you're trying to do, so they can't help you. So these guys were really helpful in how you went about things. Some differences as well from other races is that we didn't have access to our race bags on the morning of the race. So you had to have packed everything into that the day before. You only had access to your bike. So you just had to make sure you were ready with all of that. And then through the bag collection changing place, where my bike was not there was nothing really very significant around it. So I knew you have to run the whole length of the transition. Everybody does, to just keep it fair. And I kind of had an idea of how many racks I needed to run past. But then I also just keep an eye on the number boards, and I knew I needed to be in a certain zone. So I just looked for that group of bikes, and then I could spot my bike from there. You did also have to leave your helmet on your bike, which is also different from other races. They did that to keep the bags smaller, so they didn't have helmets. So that also helped, because it was easier to spot my helmet I put it on the front of my bike on my bars, so that helped a little bit. And then you grab it and you head your way out onto the Queen K.
Okay, so just a little side note here. I saw some interesting things on Instagram. A couple of the guys that I follow that were going through, taking us through like the transition areas when they were going to rack their bikes. What is the strangest thing that you saw? I saw a luminous green mountain bike helmet, which was I thought that was quite strange, being a world champs. But was there anything interesting that you saw there?
I did. I saw a girl's bike that was very aero. Like, she'd put in, you could see she'd done a lot of work, but her helmet, and people might have seen her, she had a unicorn attachment onto the top of her helmet with fluffy things and the big unicorn. And I kind of wondered why she had bothered with all the aerodynamic changes on the bike, because there was no ways that thing's going to be very aero. But there were a lot of people, I think, are super worried about the heat. So a lot of guys did not go with aero helmets, and there was a lot of just normal road helmets and that type of thing as well.
I noticed Taylor Knibb, right? She didn't ride in an aero helmet either. She was in a Trek road bike helmet, right?
Yeah, so I think it's also just like a preference thing. Kind of, if your head gets really hot, then it's worth sticking with a normal helmet.
Right.
But yeah, there be some odd things that you see at these races. Even though it's a world champs, guys are still out there doing some interesting things.
Okay, and then a couple of the people that I've spoken to who have gone to Kona, they obviously talk about the amount of debris that's on the Queen K, lots of little like bits of metal, and I know you rode tubeless tires for your race. Yeah, I mean, were you worried about punctures? Were you worried about anything like that? Did you travel with, I know you can't travel with CO2 canisters, but did you keep any CO2 canisters? Did you keep tubes? Did you think that tubeless was the right way to go for you?
Yeah, definitely for me, tubeless was the right way because I'm terrified of a puncture because it will take me so long to change one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually did get a bit of a flat on a training ride because there is a lot of stuff in the yellow lane. The positive thing is for race days, they do clean the road and they sweep it. So as long as you actually stay in the lanes, you're okay. But obviously, training wise, you're not allowed to do that. But yeah, I didn't particularly notice anything on the race that the road was really dirty or anything like that. I did ride with CO2 canisters and a tube just in case. And yeah, I had kind of made the decision that if I did pick up any sort of flat, I would bomb it, and then if that didn't work, I'd put a tube in.
Okay.
But yeah, I try not to think about it and hope it doesn't happen.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
I did ride with all the spares in case.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Let's chat a little bit about let's talk a little bit about nutrition.
Okay.
For the race. Obviously, nutrition plays a massive part in performing on the day. You know, you can swim, bike, and run as well as you possibly can, but if you're not fueled well, it's a very, very long time out there. So, talk to me a little bit about your nutrition strategy on the day. Did you do mostly like water and electrolytes with gels? Did you try and do carb drinks? Did you maybe do a balance of the two? Yeah, what were your plans on the day?
Yeah, so we played around a little bit with kind of my mixture of what I was going to do. I'd really tested out a few combinations of what worked for me. I tend to do a little bit better on a mixture. Like if I go straight just with gels and liquids, I can only tolerate that for so many hours. And I know that once I'm on the run, that's all I'm going to be able to take on. So generally on the bike, I try to take on a little bit more solid food as well. But I also did a mixture of carbohydrates with electrolytes in the bottles just to try and concentrate what I had on my bike. And then I would pick up water at the tables, basically pick it up at the start of the table, drink, pour it over myself if I felt like I needed to, and chuck it. So I wasn't really keeping water with me on the bike. And then just focusing on making sure I finished a bottle. So I think I had 70 grams of carbs in each bottle. So my goal was to finish a bottle an hour and then top that up with some extra carbohydrates in the forms of jellies, bars, like each kind of, I had them split up into the right quantities. And then I knew that I would run out of bottles of my own nutrition. So I had practiced with the Gatorade mix that I knew would be on course. So for the last hour, I then was putting that into my bottle. But it was a slightly different Gatorade to what we've been using here. It's like their Endura Gatorade, which essentially has more salt in it. So it was good, better. But it was different and the taste was a little bit different, which I wasn't super stoked about, but it was the best. I mean, it wasn't impossible to do. It was just what we had to do. Yeah.
Right. And another interesting thing about, you know, something with a higher salt content, obviously that can also play a part in a little bit of gut issues. So how was your tummy by taking on a supplement or a juice that you hadn't particularly been training with and trying, you know, in the build up to the race? Would you say that it was okay, or did you feel any distress at all?
I think I was fortunate. I was okay. I think also at a race like Kona, you know, a higher salt content is not a bad thing at all. And if anything, now looking back at my race, I think I underfueled with salt. Like I think I could have upped my sodium intake, especially for the run. So potentially actually wasn't enough because in my electrolyte mix that I use, it's very high sodium. And that's what I'd been having in the bottles before that. So potentially the Gatorade actually had less salt than
Right.
my normal nutrition. Yeah.
Right. And obviously that's because you're training in Dubai. It's very, very hot. So what you were training on had a very high sodium concentration, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And also just, there's so much research now on all this stuff, and everyone's talking about 1,000 milligrams of sodium and 100 grams of carbs, and like, so you kind of start to play around with all these numbers and basically see what you can tolerate and what you think is going to work well for you.
Yeah, so that is one of my other questions is, there has been such a shift in the amount of carbohydrates that athletes are starting to ingest. Gone are the days where guys are taking 60 grams of carbs an hour. That's no more. So some of these guys are pushing 120, 140 grams an hour. So was that, I know you said you try to stick to 70 grams, but was that only 70 grams in your bottle? Were you trying to push a little bit more than that? Did you train yourself to tolerate a little bit more than that, or was 70 grams sort of like your limit?
So yeah, in total, I think I was probably taking on about 88, 85 grams an hour, which is pretty high. But I've done quite a lot of research on this and read a lot. And the thing about this carbohydrate intake, which potentially people get wrong, is you can take in 120 grams of carbs, but if you're not digesting 120 grams of carbs, you are wasting your time. So kind of finding that sweet spot is really the key. And I tried to go a little bit higher. So I did a few sessions in training with 85 grams of carbs in my bottles, and then taking on top. So that would put me nearly at 100 grams an hour. That didn't work well for me. So by the time I got to like midway through my run, my gut was done. I couldn't take any more on. So that's when I started to lower it a little bit and kind of found the 70 grams was the best in terms of liquid carbs, and then tried to take solid carbs on top of that. Also just for like taste, and your mouth gets tired of tasting the same thing, and then you're less likely to take it on as well. So I try to keep it a little bit varied to make sure that I'm actually ingesting enough and not just going on what I feel like or what I can taste.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Mel, I know that we've gone over our time by quite a little bit. So thanks for chatting to us. I've got maybe one or two more questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it. No.
All right. So two questions. One about the venue change that we've had for the World Championships. You've obviously, it's been in Kona for the longest time, and now they've split the men's and women's races, between France and Hawaii. Would you have targeted a World Championship slot if it was not on the Big Island? And then do you think that, talk to me a little bit about that. Do you think that they should try and find a venue that caters for both men and women's races, or do you think the way they're doing it now is a good way to do it by alternating? It does offer a little bit of variability, also caters to different athletes potentially winning the World Championship title. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Personally, I don't think I would have taken a slot to Nice if that was offered, because I don't talk about world champs. I spoke about going to Kona.
Right.
It's this elusive race, regardless of, being the world championships, it's Kona. And to me, that was what I wanted to do. And I think there's a large group of people that probably felt the same. So interestingly, when we qualified, the split had not been announced yet. So everybody who qualified with me, male and female, all got Kona slots.
Right.
In the Ironman split was announced a few weeks later, and none of the guys that I qualified with took their Nice slot. They all moved it to Kona because they all want to race in Kona. And I think, I fully understand all the reasoning, and this is debated, and it was one of the hottest topics in Kona. Like, everyone was talking about it because it was unusual to only have females racing. I mean, it was amazing for the pro women. Like, I can fully understand for them having their own day.
Right.
Personally, I don't know how sustainable it is. Like, you know, for how long can families and couples split between two events? You know, if you've got two people racing world championship events, are they going to go to 2 races a year? Like, it's quite a thing. And I just don't think any other venue is ever going to be Kona.
Right.
And it would be very sad, I think, if it ever left Kona completely. So I do understand that potentially this option that is now available is maybe our best option, in that it rotates, and at least every second year you can go to Kona. But, you know, there's a lot of talk that it might not go back to Kona ever, like after this 2025. And that would be, I think, quite detrimental to the sport, because there is definitely something about that race, and there's so much history there. It would be very sad to see it leave the island completely.
Yeah, they talk about the magic of the island, right? That's one of the catchphrases that you hear in all of the sort of the big YouTube interviews, where you see all the pros, obviously being interviewed before their races and obviously after their races. So no, I agree with you. I think it would be very sad. It's just something that's now become kind of like a tradition, right? And everyone chases that goal. Okay, cool, Mel. Thank you so much for your time. Hopefully you've answered some questions that might help other people be better prepared when they decide to go. Once again, thanks for coming on, and really well done. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Okay, cool. Cheers, eh?